with Descartes, French philosopher, 17th century, who divided mind and body, matter and mind, and that's called dualism. He said, well, the mind and the body are physically in two different parallel universes. Today we will call them universes. And this had one big advantage, that when the body dies, the mind doesn't have to die, because it lives somewhere else. It had incredible influence on Western civilization, because it separated what today we call physics from religion. You just study physics and you don't interfere with the religion, and if you are a priest, a theologian, you study religion, you don't deal with physics. And then Newton came right after, and so on and so on. It had one small problem. I mean, if these two substances, mind and body, exist in different universes, how do they communicate? I decided to lift my hand, and I do. Somehow my mind communicates with my body. Anyway, that was the beginning, and then it had a lot of different variations, flavors, because that's the question: how do they communicate? And people came up with all sorts of answers. And now I will just pick two, because they will keep coming up. I will not name them, but if you remember what they are, you will go, oh, that's what those philosophers would say. So epiphenomenalism answered the question by saying, actually, mind is an accident. It's an accidental byproduct. Okay? The only thing that really exists is matter. Is today we would say atoms and particles, and there's some laws that rule matter. And by accident, there's this. It's like when you're driving on a dusty road and there's smoke behind it, but that's not part of the car really. It's just an accident. Okay? So epiphenomenalism says, sorry guys, but your consciousness, your feelings, whatever, it's actually just a decoration, okay? Trialism said, well, yes, there are these two universes, and the way they communicate is through an intermediary. The intermediary that the Greek philosopher Plato called the world of ideas, and they call it different names, but it's the same thing, basically. So basically, thoughts exist somewhere. There's your mind, your body, and they both access thoughts, and that's how they communicate. So that's dualism. Those are two different universes. The beauty of it, the mind doesn't have to die when the body dies. The problem is, how do they communicate? Then monism says there's only one substance. And at this point you have two kinds of monist philosophy. One is the philosophy that says there is only mind, and the other one is the philosophy that says that there is only matter. And the one that says there is only mind can actually end this class in one sentence. The only thing that exists is in my mind. You guys are fiction of my mind. That's the only thing that exists. Or it can be a little more flexible and say, well, the only thing that exists is minds. All of our minds do exist, but this is just, imagination. And Spinoza said that the only thing that exists is God. We're all part of God, actually. That's also a form of monism. And then, of course, these guys have to really either deny that this desk exists, or explain how does, if it's all mind, then what? So like panpsychism doesn't go to the extreme of saying only my mind exists, but it says everything has a mind to some extent. So chimps have a mind, dogs have a spiders have a mind, in just different degrees. And yes, this desk has a mind to some degree, which is probably very, okay? Materialism says, no, the only thing that exists is matter, okay? Ignore your conscious feelings. Those are the product of something that goes on in the brain. It's a material process. There's equations that explain how this happens. We just haven't figured out the equations, but it's just a material thing. And the problem materialism has, of course, is that it still hasn't explained my consciousness. We have this wonderful body of knowledge that comes from physics, chemistry, and all the other material sciences, the hard sciences, and that predicts all sorts of stuff. Black holes, quasars, Big Bang, and so on, but it does not predict my existence. Okay, there's nothing in those equations by Newton, Einstein, quantum mechanics that also says, and Piero Scaruffi's consciousness exists somewhere. So materialism has the problem of explaining how those neural processes in the brain eventually, somehow, translate into the feelings, my awareness of being alive, and so on. As I said the last time, the word idealism and materialism, today they're used in different ways. Okay, idealism does not mean the hippies in this context. It means philosophers who believe that only mind exists. Materialism does not mean greedy bastards. It means philosophers who believe everything is material. And then some people got tired of this discussion. I mean, this went on for centuries. And then in the 50s it picked up dramatically. Some people got tired of it. I credit Ryle with starting the discussion. You can pick your favorite philosopher. They're all very difficult to read, so it's hard to have a favorite. And they contradict each other all the time, and each one contradicts himself. Okay, sometimes. But one school that came out of this was the behaviorists, probably more successful in psychology and philosophy, but they basically said, let's stop talking about mind. Okay, all this stuff about the desire and the feelings, forget about it. I only want to talk about behavior, because the only thing that matters at the end of the day is the behavior of people, but not only people. They started studying animals first. And so they studied what drives behavior and what doesn't, and what people do, don't do. And this was more successful in psychology, because in psychology, Pavlov, Skinner, they did achieve results. Okay, they did show that you could train people to do things and train people not to do things, to some extent, of course. Another school that sort of said, let's forget this discussion, was functionalism, which is very similar, way more successful in philosophy. Functionalism basically says the only thing that I want to talk about is what is the function that these quote-unquote mental states do. I don't want to discuss what the mental states are, the substance, but I want to discuss what their purpose is. And so they came up with this school of thought where the only thing was, well, there's some input, there's some output, there's some processing in between, and guess what? That's what computers are like. So in the functionalism, it really doesn't require this stuff, to have a mind. A computer also can do what we do if you think in terms of function, okay? And today, of course, we live in the age where computers are beginning to do a lot of things that we do. So this, the most popular, at least famous, branch was computational functionalism. That means precisely that. If you read what they talk about, and you are a computer scientist, you can easily relate it to their discussion. There's physical states that generate some other states, and so on and so on, and the mind is viewed as coded in some symbols, in a symbolic language called mentalese, and so on and so on. So these two guys basically avoided the discussion. And then I also mentioned another school of thought that was not popular for a long time, if nothing else because these two gentlemen are incredibly complicated to understand. But their point has come back to haunt us, because what Husserl said a century ago, he was against science. That was the peak of the scientific revolution. Just before Einstein quantum mechanics, when science was going like this, it was obviously going to go further. And he said, guys, we're doing everything wrong. Because the whole point of science is there's a subject and there's an object. And I studied the object and I described the object. And said, that's impossible, because you and the object are part of the same thing. The whole world is one thing. You cannot separate subject and object, so you cannot separate, in a sense, you cannot separate mind and matter. They interact all the time. You are part of the experiment that you are conducting.
Doesn't that evaluate to a kind of monism? I mean, if there's no differentiation between the subject and the object, that's kind of... sounds monistic to me.
Well, we would have to ask them. I think they would probably answer no, because they just didn't like the whole discussion. Yeah, I mean, we get into... These are the questions that drive a 2-hour conversation in a class of philosophy. So, okay, anyway, there was the diagram last evening. And then I told you a little bit about cognitive psychology, and I handpicked things that have been very influential in the discussion. And the one thing I mentioned, so the number one thing that I really want people to remember is they started with Bartlett in 1932. This psychologist was studying memory. Memory is to this day. It's you know, last time I had some visual tricks and stuff. It's amazing. Right? So on one hand, it is so powerful. On the other hand, it is so pathetic. You know, we forget. Just the fact that we forget tells you, right? What kind of memory is that? But at the same time, Bartlett came up with this paradigm of the reconstructive memory. We watch a movie, 1 hour and a half, we walk outside the movie, somebody asks me, so what went on? What was the movie about? And in 3 minutes I summarize the movie. Right? That's amazing. That's amazing. But what is even more amazing, that I'm not using a single word, a single sentence that was said in the movie. Right? It's not like a computer would just memorize every pixel of the image, every word said, and it would just replay it. Done. We cannot do that. But what we do is even more amazing, because we can talk about that movie in different words. And if we say it 3 times, 3 different people ask us the same question, we will not use the same words. Try. Okay? It's really hard to say the same thing. If I had to restart this evening from the beginning, there's no way in heaven I can use the same words. Right? Isn't that amazing? Why? Okay? So that's the thing that the most important, I think, of the paradigm shifts that happened in cognitive psychology was really focusing on this fact. Memory is not storage. What the computer does is storage. What we do is not storage. It's something really. And then I told you different theories. The most popular today comes from the schema, the idea that we expect things. It's not that we do logical reasoning on the world. We have expectations about what the world is like. So the classic example is that you walk into a restaurant and you don't have to use massive mathematical logic to figure out what's going to happen. You enter a restaurant, because it's a restaurant, you have a schema that tells you, wait for somebody to seat you. If you're in this country, if you're in Italy, good luck. And then it tells you somebody will bring you a menu, then you have to order from the menu, and then you wait, then somebody will bring you the food, and then somebody will bring you the check, and so on. So this is ready. You don't have to calculate the situation every time. Okay, your mind expects that this is going to happen, and so it's much easier to understand the situation. If nobody comes and you're waiting, there's something wrong with the person supposed to sit you. There's a strike, you know. So these things are easier to understand when you have, when your mind, when your memory is structured in schemas. Okay, so that's a rapid summary of what we discussed last evening, just for the purpose of reminding the main things. Okay.